everyone, this is Waz from MarketsAI. Welcome to a two-part video series designed to give the viewer a clear understanding of how the data contained in Exchange PCAP files can be transformed into valuable information about your order executions. Let's begin with a very clear understanding of the purpose of taking the deep dive into market microstructure by analyzing packet capture files. The information discovered by analyzing PCAP MBO data reveals the precise nature of an order's execution, and the underlying data can be used to measure an order execution's strategy and determine its relative success or failure. The bottom line is that by evaluating your order's execution, an optimal strategy for achieving your desired fills on a particular order book can be determined, which can save one or more ticks as compared to your current order executions. Just as order objectives vary, so does execution quality. The simplest version of this work is to teach traders or brokers better approaches to order execution, or in some cases, reward high performers and weed out those with suboptimal or blatantly poor executions. Even a single tick for a medium-sized shop with a modest monthly flow of 10,000 lots translates into $100,000 in monthly savings. Every order seems to have a story to tell. We're going to discuss these charts in great detail in the video for part 2 of this topic, so for now, suffice it to say that the important bit is to start to get used to market by order data. We have a queue inside of a queue, something actually quite difficult to visualize. The first queue is made up of the different price levels on the offer or bid, 244s through 247s in this case. And the second, the individual orders resting within each individual price level. Another feature is that the price is not an absolute horizontal value, but in a price band. Within each band, the resting orders are sorted according to their order priorities. Every attempt has been made to orient the charts such that they are consistent with industry norms for viewing depth of market. Now let's find out where the PCAP data comes from. The two largest futures and options on futures exchanges are CME and ICE. Each is actually made up of several formally defined exchanges, so clearing members can align with their area of interest. The primary physical crossroads of the two exchanges is the CMAC Data Center in downtown Chicago. Exchanges with central limit order books, such as CME and ICE, have two main electronic means to communicate with their clients. One is a private bidirectional link that accepts and confirms a client's orders one-to-one, and the second is a UDP broadcast of all publicly available market data from the exchange. UDP simply means that it is broadcast without requiring any confirmation of receipt, although there are replay mechanisms available on request on a separate channel. After it's recorded in CMAC on the ticker plants during the overnight break, or the 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern Time break, the files are moved over to an AWS S3 bucket in US 1, region US 1. So let's get an understanding about what a PCAP is. A PCAP is normally used by IT professionals to sniff what's the network traffic, both from a security standpoint, a load balancing standpoint, an engineering standpoint. But in our particular case, we're using a ticker plant. We're interested in the payloads inside of them. Normally it might be a fragment of a Word document or something like that flying by, but in our case, the data is what we want. And this is recorded by a specialized server called a ticker plant or a ticker factory. And this is the most granular data available, market data available from the futures exchanges. To start with, we have the exchange's data center. For the largest futures exchange, this typically consists of 1,000 central limit order book servers with matching engines and approximately 100 gateway servers. While not the case 5 years ago, today exchanges monitor the gateways to ensure that they transmit data at the same time and rate so that direct access firms cannot gateway shop or otherwise take advantage of any performance difference between gateways. In the case of CMAC and Aurora, there exists a high-speed backbone connection between the two data centers, so there's no particular advantage as to either physical co-location strategy, at least as it applies to arbitrage between the CME and ICE. The connection to the exchange networks is via a network bridge, typically owned directly by liquidity providers, or in the case of commercials and buy-side firms, through their FCM connections. As you can imagine, it takes specialized knowledge of the network and server hardware and software to optimize the ticker plant connection such that it virtually eliminates the possibility of dropping packets. This is the decoded payload of a single network packet emitted by an exchange gateway. This particular packet contains a single MBO packet. You can tell it's MBO data by the fact that it has an incremental refresh that includes an identifiable order ID and priority. A couple of items of note. If you look at the top here, you'll see sending time. It's in nanoseconds since the epoch, or the number of nanoseconds since January 1st, 1970. According to the exchange, it has microsecond precision. I've put a link in the description of this video to the exchange's online documentation. One of the important things to understand at this point is that the data is organized to maximize streaming throughput. One of the consequences of this is that it is self-referencing in time, and segments of the data cannot be analyzed in isolation without the stream's overall context, or some book-building technique must be used to sequentially include all live or active data to the present time of the analysis on the book. This is an illustration of a typical market by price order ladder. This is the traditional way of looking at the visible depth of market available on a given order book and is common to many ISV trading platforms. Don't let the negative prices in the center column throw you. Negative prices are common on spread books. On professional platforms, implied liquidity can be toggled on and off so that if a trader views implied liquidity similar to phantom liquidity, they won't see it as available. Beginning in 2017, the CME began to broadcast MBO data interleaved with their standard feed and encoded as MDP 3.0 using simple binary encoding. It is note that ICE has always transmitted MBO data, and it is in fact the primary way in which the market data is transmitted. So MBO data forms a queue inside of a queue. The first queue displays the quantity inside a particular price level, like 193.14s. And within each of these price levels, a second queue of all the resting visible orders is sorted by order priority. These are the priorities. I left the order IDs out, but you can see these various quantities, lowest priority to highest. The highest priority is the lowest number. And then in this example, we have 100 at an implied depth, which is at the back of the queue. Implieds are always at the back of the queue. In this example, if you add up the individual order quantities and add the implied quote quantity of 100, it equals 193 offered quantity on the traditional ladder display. Now, our task is to somehow visualize this data so that we can peer into its complexity, and for lack of a better way to say it, extract useful order book behavioral characteristics. This is the functional equivalent of the two approaches. So the traditional way is you would see the depth if you turned on the implied quote option. The total quoted amount would be the direct quotes plus the implied quotes at a given price level, which is the same thing as adding up all of the MBOs and their individual quantities along with the implied depth, and they will be the same. So in order to see what the data means, to convert data to information, we are going to enter the MarketsAI Toolbox and see sort of what the process is to acquiring the files and generating some of the built book information and then generating the graphic. And then in part 2, we'll explain in a very detailed fashion what the graphics represent. You have arrived at the MarketsAI Toolbox. If you want to go to the Toolbox live and perhaps request a demo, you can just type in Markets.AI into any web browser. The MarketsAI Toolbox is a notebook program system that allows the sharing of notebooks between colleagues and also generates beautiful graphics for display in customer-facing work as well as internal reviews. We'll log in here, and you can see down here there are a list of notebooks. What we're about to do is certainly not the only function of the MarketsAI Toolbox. It's a very rich environment, and the programming library, the MAI lib, is continuing to grow and will for the foreseeable future. We'll begin our journey into visualizing MBO data and how orders perform on order books, all from those original PCAP files. We're going to first download this data file from AWS S3 bucket. It's a simple command. It just is downloading. This is what we are interested in here. This is the file. And all you have to do is go click, and that took all of 4 seconds to do. We are going to load a series of classes to handle these 64-bit nanosecond timestamps, which are a bear to interpret. And now let's just take a look at what's inside of the iPCAP file, the MarketsAI PCAP file. We have a list of 33 fields. This is a look at the rows in the data. I'm going to zoom out temporarily just so you can see it in a more cohesive way. And so we can now see here all the rows. I know that on the YouTube video it's going to be pretty tiny, but it's a lot of data. Let's zoom back in again. I guess the first thing of interest would be to look at this entry type here. What we have is we have MBO messages coming through, implied quotes coming through, direct quotes coming through, another MBO, direct quote, MBO, and so forth. And then we have a trade come through here, and it's matched against various other orders on the book and perhaps off if they're implied matches. And then we have a series of MBO updates after the matches have occurred to those orders, and then direct quotes, because that summary addition of all those MBOs is going to go back to the direct quote, and that needs to be updated too. So that's sort of an example of the flow of the data of the messaging that occurs within the PCAP files. This is just sort of an orienting preview of just the trade data. This tabular format is built in to the toolbox. And there again, you can just see a little bit more clearly all the data that's coming through. And here are the trades. It trades in a fairly tight range, and then towards the end of the session dives off. What we need to do is pick an order of interest. And since MarketsAI has no book of its own, we have to be a little bit creative here. Normally, the order IDs would be your order IDs, at least to start out with, and then you want to perhaps find similar orders to compare them to from other people. But those numbers, this order ID number, will be part of your CME iLink data, or at the end of the day, if you want to process them in a batch file, they can be found in your order execution logs, your daily log files from executions on your ISV or whatever platform you have. But in my case, because I don't have a book, I have to pick something that hopefully is interesting. So what I did here is to pick all the order IDs and sort them by the number of matches, from the greatest number of matches to the least. And for no particular reason at all, we are going to pick this number here. It's up there. It's ranked pretty high. I want to pick the most complicated because I want to be able to see the flow clearly. So for our order ID of interest that we've picked for no particular reason at all, we are first going to generate the built book. I just expanded the notebook so that you can see the programs. These are the MAI library programs here and here. The first one builds the book using the best bid and offer. And this is the file that we downloaded from the S3 bucket, the PCAP file. And then secondly, we are going to generate the graphic file for our order of interest ending in 2185 here. So the S in the command line here is for the source file, build the book. And then here, S is for the source file, which is the built book file this time. And we're going to output for our order of interest. And we are going to have a price level +1 above and below the active range of the order. And we do that, those run, and what we end up with is we generate this HTML file. This is the single order graphic file for October 16th session of the DeSjan natural gas spread, our order of interest ending in 2185. And it's a pretty mundane, simple limit order that's just resting on the book, has almost 11,000 individual order elements throughout the chart. We are going to save the explanation for the details and the stats for part 2. This is mainly just to illustrate how these things are generated. Each one of those programs can be run independently on any box not within the notebook system as long as you have the data files. Just to show you a tad bit more about the toolbox itself, these are some of the built-in graphics that are available. This is another example of the trade chart, except this time we're going to use a bubble chart with encoding by a color for each one of the individual orders that's traded. So let's move to our next notebook. For this second example, we're going to pick a very complex book and order, probably the busiest book. This is a Jan prompt crude book for November 11th's date. And we're going to follow the same process we did in the first example. So we are going to download the data, load a couple time classes, and we have to find an order of interest. And in this case, we are going to pick the order ID with the most matches on the book. We're going to try and make this as complex as it can be. Our order of interest is going to be this number here, ending in 1384. And now we'll prepare the book for processing by building the best bid offer data from the PCAP file. And then for our order ending 1384, we are going to generate the graphic. And here it is. It has 447,000 graphic elements for orders. And I'm going to save the in-depth description of all of the statistics and how to interpret this for part 2 of the series. But just to take a peek here, the order lasted 41 minutes. It came in as an iceberg and it rested. And by not becoming aggressive, selling 63s, and this goes down to 49s in trades here, and then comes back up and lifts him. The passive resting order here, it runs away again. It gets refilled in here because this is an iceberg. The opening quantity came in with, it was 10, and it ended up for a total fill of 300 lots. A sign of patience benefiting the trader. We have one more example that we'll take a peek at. Our third example is just to show how easy it is to manage multiple books and develop a process that is either a daily function or a combined batch type function so that this all can be done at once and distributed as needed. So here we just are downloading 8 different books from a given day. Presumably T+1, you would download all the order books that you had traded on. Following the same methodology, we're going to build the best bid offer books for each one of those. And I go through my method of finding an order of interest. And we will pick on this one ending in 72, another complex crude book. Take this single order graphic and then take a look at it. This one has 67,000 elements versus the last one had 447,000 individual elements. And you can see, you can hover over any one of the elements and get all the data and the element info. And because we loaded all those books at once, they are all available to us. Go through the same methodology. This time we'll look at an RBOB gasoline book, same day. Pick out an order and do the same thing. So this is an RBOB spread book order graphic. And that concludes part 1 of our PCAP series. And I hope that you found it interesting. It was a process-oriented one. We are about to take the deep dive into actually describing what all the information is in these displays. The beautiful thing is that these are all standalone HTML files. You can convert them to PDFs and the like, but if you keep them as standalone HTML files, you can load them on any given browser, move them around without having to have the notebook system behind it. Like I said, standalone, and they're self-contained. All of the data is inside of the HTML file. So you don't need anything additional to get them to work. Thank you for your time, and please stick around for part 2. It's really the core of this subject. And that concludes part 1 of unlocking the value of Exchange PCAP files, the data.